Welcome back to the debate for the United States Senate from the campus of Nova Southeastern University in Davie. This event is being seen by voters across the state. We will get right back to the questions, and we're going to get right back to where we ended that half hour with Congressman Meek telling the governor that he had flip-flopped on some issues. And that is something that your opponents have accused you of doing. In making your run as an independent, you changed some of the positions you had held as a Republican in the past. In one of Aesop's fables, he talked about the bats and the beasts and the birds, and how the beasts and the birds were in a fight, and the bat wouldn't pick a side. In the end, the moral of the story was that he who is neither one thing or another has no friends. Who are you now, and how will you vote when you go to the Senate?
I'm the same guy I've always been. I'm Charlie Crist, and I am a fiscal conservative and a social moderate. You know, I believe that we have to spend our money wisely. We have to make sure that your taxes are low. We have to make sure that small businesses have the opportunity to provide more jobs for people across the state of Florida. I also believe in live and let live. You know, I'm running against a guy in Marco Rubio when it comes to issues related to women. Believes that a woman's right to choose ought to be taken away by overturning, literally, overturning Roe versus Wade. I don't think that's right for Florida. I don't think it's right for women. I'm also a guy who believes in protecting our senior citizens. Again, Marco Rubio talks about raising the age of eligibility for Social Security and putting all these things, including privatization, on the table. As it relates to me, the only things that are on the table as it relates to Social Security are making sure that other people's hands stay out of it. We have a duty, in my view, to protect it, to preserve it for the American people and the people of our state. I'm a guy who believes in common sense, not nonsense. I am running against an extreme right-wing candidate who believes in taking away women's rights, punishing seniors, and punishing teachers, and that's just not right.
Mr. Meek, your voting record is almost identical to Nancy Pelosi's. Your positions could have been written, your platform could have been written by the White House. At a time when the administration's most significant positions are extremely unpopular among Floridians, barely supported by a third of the population. Almost two-thirds of the American population thinks we're on the wrong track. Why should they elect someone who is so closely associated with the administration's policies?
Well, I can tell you, as it relates to policy, it's policy that I believe in. I think it's very important that people have health care. I think it's very important that we stand up to Wall Street, because the deregulators on both sides of me. That's what got us in this mess in the first place. I believe in housing reform, that I put legislation within the housing bill that went after those that attacked Floridians and taking them into foreclosure fraudulently. I look forward to standing with things that work. Offshore oil drilling, I was against the administration's proposal. As it relates to NASA, I stood up and it got better from the administration. And when it comes down to fighting for Floridians, I'm on their side. I think it's very, very important to note that I'm standing between two individuals that have been in the room together, dealing with the state budget, dealing with the issues that are facing Floridians. They know they've had conversations. When minimum wage was up here in Florida, I was the only one on this stage that stood for minimum wage for working people. When it came down to health care, I'm the only person that actually fought for health care. When it came down to fighting for our environment and sticking with our environment with green jobs initiatives, I'm the only one. And I'm the only candidate that will stand up on behalf of Floridians and not the special interests.
Thank you, Mr.
That's why it's important I become your next United States Senator.
Mr. Rubio, you are running on what many commentators have described as one of the more anti-Latino platforms around. You support the Arizona immigration law, you oppose the DREAM Act, you oppose a pathway to citizenship, you support English as an official language. All those issues are issues that appeal to the most conservative elements of the Republican Party, to the Tea Party, and it has made you a darling of the Tea Party across the country and got you enormous support from the Tea Party. How can Florida voters feel comfortable that you are not beholden to interests from without the state in the Tea Party, the most conservative elements of the Tea Party?
First of all, let me tell you, I'm the only candidate running that has a platform on his website that actually outlines specific ideas of what I will stand for. Now, let me tell you something. I reject the characterization of my platform with regards to Americans of Hispanic descent, because my platform is that we enforce the laws. Look, there's no one running in America that's more pro-legal immigration than I am. My parents were immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. My wife's parents were immigrants. I've grown up around immigration my whole life. I think immigration is an important part of our heritage and a key part of our future economically. I just don't think America can be the only country in the world that does not enforce its immigration laws. And what I've said is that the immigration laws need to be followed and that we need to have a legal immigration system that works. Now, unfortunately, in politics today, we resort to the characterizations of people's you've heard our political positions. You've heard that already here today, talk of extremism and things of that nature. The things I believe in are pretty simple to understand. I believe that the economy doesn't grow because of politicians. It grows because of people that start businesses or expand existing businesses. I believe our government cannot continue to spend more money than it takes in. And I believe the world is a safer and better place when America is the strongest country in the world. These are the things that I believe in. These are the things I'll stand for if, God willing, I'm elected to the U.S. Senate 2 weeks from today.
Thank you, Mr. Rubio. Michael Williams.
Gentlemen, issues of character and integrity consistently come up among Floridians, many of whom say that all politicians are the same. I want to ask each of you about specific issues that have come up in your background. Beginning with you, Mr. Meek, at one point you tried to help land federal money for a developer, Dennis Stackhouse, now facing federal charges on unrelated matters, I might add. All that at a time when your mother, former Congresswoman Carrie Meek, was being paid a sizable consultant fee by Mr. Stackhouse and provided a luxury car for her use. You claimed at one point to not be aware of at least some of those ties. Why is that, number one? And why should anybody consider that any more than typical business as usual in Washington by you?
Well, the bottom line is that my track record doesn't speak to anything that's unethical or off color. I think it's important to note that I've been a state trooper in this state, voted for every ethics bill that has come before the state legislature or the House of Representatives, and led into Congress as it relates to culture and corruption and cronyism. Bottom line is that I represent a poverty district. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running for the United States Senate, to make sure that we have leadership that will put people back to work. And when it comes down to the situation dealing with Mr. Stackhouse, the state attorney is doing what she has to do, and I support her in that effort. But I think it's very, very important for Floridians to know that I'm a working elected official, someone that's going to dive into problems and deal with them. And I think it's very, very important to also note that this state needs strong leadership that has integrity. And that's the reason why I took the time to go throughout this great state of ours, getting signatures, looking Floridians in the eye, and asking them to sign a petition to place my name on the ballot. That's the reason why I won the primary, and that's the reason why I'm going to win this general election, because I'm connected to the everyday Floridians. I'm a public servant, and I'm not a politician.
Mr. Meek, in 5 or 10 seconds, should you have known more about those ties? Should you have avoided them altogether, yes or no?
Well, let me just say this. I think it's very, very important to note that had to do it all over again, would have paid closer attention to what was going on, but I can tell you there's no improprieties there as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Meek, thank you. Mr. Rubio, you, among other things, have had to pay back at one point some years ago, about 2 years ago, $16,000 in personal expenses run up on a Florida Republican Party issued credit card, personal expenses. You had a home in Tallahassee at one point near foreclosure. You champion yourself as a watchdog of the federal budget. Why, given your own financial issues, should people believe that you will indeed be a good watchdog for the federal purse?
Well, let me set the record straight. My personal expenses have never been paid for by the Republican Party. Anything that's personal, I've paid for out of my own pocket.
But you did put them on a GOP-issued credit card at one point.
But I paid for them out of my own pocket. Now, clearly, if I had a chance to do those things again, we'd handle it all very differently. But the bottom line, and the most important thing to understand, is that I have never had personal expenses paid for by the Republican Party. I have always paid for them out of my own pocket. Now, these are important issues, and we should discuss them. But they can't be the only issue in this campaign. And let me tell you the issues that are not being discussed. We are now literally halfway through this debate. We are less than 2 weeks away from Election Day. And on question after question, this panel has answered. We have not heard a plan. Now, at least Congressman Meek has a voting record. But we have not heard a serious plan on Medicare, by my count, on Social Security, on the health care package, even when pressed. And let me tell you why that matters. This election can't be like the other ones, because the stakes are too generational. They're too high. We are literally deciding what kind of country our children are going to inherit. We are on the verge of being the first generation of Americans to leave the next generation of Americans worse off. And we're not going to fix that by sending typical politicians to Washington that are willing to look into a camera and say or do whatever they have to say or do just to win the next election. We already have too many people like that in Washington, D.C.
And yet, Mr. Crist's character and integrity and judgment do go into those qualities of who will be our next United States Senator. You, Mr. Crist, pushed over the strong objections of Republican Party leaders in our state for Jim Greer as chairman of the Florida Republican Party. Greer now faces charges involving alleged misuse of hundreds of thousands of dollars of party donations, and yet you stood by him to the very, very end. Why did you do so? What does it say about your judgment and your ability to make decisions about the kind of people you put around yourself?
You do the very best you can when you're picking people, whether it's to help out my former political party, an agency in Tallahassee as a secretary head, or a judge for the Florida Supreme Court. And that applies in every instance and in every appointment that I have made. And when you do the best that you can, sometimes you're disappointed. And that happens from time to time. It happened to Governor Jeb Bush. He appointed a guy to be the head of the Department of Corrections who ended up getting arrested after he was indicted and is now in prison. It happens. All you can do is the very best that you can. But I do want to talk about what has happened as it relates to my Republican opponent. You know, there's an expression in Washington called pay to play. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me relate it to you and the possibility of what it means here in Florida. When the Speaker was Speaker of the Florida House, he had a home here in Miami in South Florida. It was for sale. And before that sale took place, he was on the other side of a personal injury protection issue. It was a Dr. Saracita that he ended up selling the home to that had an interest in that issue. Once he sold the home for $380,000 cash, the Speaker's position on the issue changed, and all of a sudden, miraculously, that bill went through.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Crist.
what we don't need in Washington.
Mr. Rubio?
I need to address that. Let me set the record straight on that, first of all, and then tell you why this is happening and why you're hearing these kinds of outrageous attacks from the government.
It's happening because it was in the Sarasota Herald Tribune just about a week ago.
Thank you. Let me set the record straight for the governor, and then I'll tell you guys why this is happening. You guys are watching at home and watching this display.
It's happening because you deserve to know what each of us stand for and where we are on the issues. The election is, he's right.
Let's let Mr. Rubio respond.
Let's set the record. First of all, what the governor said is categorically false about the sale. If you want the gory details, you can go on our website, marcorubio.com. It's all outlined there. The house was an arm's-length transaction. The gentleman's mom still lives in the home. We actually reduced the price of the home. It had been for sale for months, and my position did not change. Subsequent to the sale of that property, the PIP legislation the governor's talking about failed to pass in the Florida House, and it didn't pass for months later until a deal was cut with the Senate to fix it. Now let's talk about why this is happening. Because the governor's running on this idea that he's some sort of a centrist, saying he wants to go to Washington and change the tone of Washington, and yet in front of a live audience in this state, he's just launched a vicious personal attack against me based on a falsehood. Why is this happening? No, I'm telling you, please, because this was a personal attack directly at me. Why is this happening? It's because the governor is not, the governor's not a common sense conservative.
It's not a personal attack.
The governor switched parties after he took a poll. It was documented. You talk about newspapers, Governor. The St. Pete Times had a reporter with Governor Crist on the day he switched parties. And you know what the last call he made before he switched parties was? To his pollster. And when his pollster told him that he had a better chance to win as an independent than as a Republican,
let's move on. I'm going to have to take
parties.
control here. Let's take control of the personal attacks and move on to some more substance. Miriam, please.